Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Climate. I'm Jennifer Roberts, Director of Path to Positive Communities for ecoAmerica, and I'll be your host. Thank you for joining us for Local Communities Act, Rising to the Climate Challenge in 2021. We know it's an unsettling time for many of you in the midst of a pandemic, watching the violence in our nation's capital, but at ecoAmerica today, we're going to be inspirational and maybe lighten things up a bit to talk about climate progress that's happening in the midst of it all. So just a few housekeeping things. This session's being recorded. You can watch it later on our YouTube channel. You can engage with us with the hashtag Let's Talk Climate on social media. And you can also use the chat function today to ask questions. Send your question by choosing all panelists from the dropdown. Our staff are standing by to help us get those answered. So today we're talking about local communities rising to the climate challenge, but I'm going to start with a climate quick take, which is some recent news about climate change and Florida, since we're focusing on Southwest Florida. Florida is definitely aware of how the climate is changing. A study just released by Zillow and Go Banking of over 300 US cities found 40 cities were at most risk for lower home values because of rising sea levels. 18 of them are in Florida, including Fort Myers Beach, Sanibel, and Naples is number 10. Next slide. Also in the news, the Florida State Senate began talks this week about setting up a statewide Office of Resiliency. Now, Governor DeSantis set this office up 2 years ago, but the position of Chief Resiliency Officer has been empty for over a year after Julie Nishwat left to work in the federal administration. State Senator Rodriguez would also set up, his proposal would also set up a 9-member sea level rise task force to establish baseline projections on anticipated sea level rise and flooding impacts along the coastlines. This bill is filed for the 2021 session, which starts on March the 2nd. And finally, the Florida Public Service Commission voted last week to approve Duke Energy's plans to build 10 new solar plants in the next 4 years. Florida's installation of solar energy keeps increasing. Next slide. But while the state ranks 4th in the US, solar still accounts for less than 3% of the state's total energy production, but making progress. And with that, we're going to turn to our conversation today. And I want to introduce our speakers. We have Rob Moher, who is the director of the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, and Anna Puszkin-Chevlin, the regional director of Growing Climate Solutions, Path to Positive Southwest Florida. Thank you both so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Thanks so much. And in line of the news I just shared, I want to say it's clear that Florida knows that sea levels are rising. Can you talk a little bit about how that awareness played into the founding and the progress of this great climate program that we have now in Southwest Florida, Growing Climate Solutions? I know that, Rob, you helped pull the program together. You got some funders, you got some community foundations. Just tell us the story.
Sure. So great to be with everyone today, and thank you for all your action individually and collectively on the climate front. So yes, we're located here at ground zero of potential impacts and current impacts from climate change in Florida, Southwest Florida. I work for an organization called the Conservancy of Southwest Florida, which is entering its 57th year. And the long and short of it was we came out of a strategic plan process as a board, understanding that we had to contribute towards the solutions for climate change, but we really weren't sure how we fit in. We are not a national organization. We did not want to duplicate efforts of others. So we started really focusing on trying to reposition in a highly polarized debate back then, about 5 years ago, environment versus economy. We really tried to get away from that and saying, after Hurricane Irma, everyone understood that climate change was a community issue and that this was impacting our communities now and really would impact in a significant way the viability of our communities. And so we sort of took that and said, you know, let's reposition this as a community issue. Let's try and look at this from multiple dimensions. So just through some good connections, we managed to hook up with ecoAmerica through some board contacts, and they agreed to partner with us and inform us so we could be smart followers and not reinvent the wheel. The long and short of it was we approached two regional community foundations, the Community Foundation of Collier County and the Southwest Florida Community Foundation, which is based in Fort Myers. And we basically pitched them on the idea of having them as founding supporters to financially contribute towards a 3-year launch of this regional initiative. We felt this really had to be regional and not just done by county level because we all face the same challenges. It doesn't matter if you're in Punta Gorda, down on Marco Island, Everglades City, the impacts and the concerns and the issues are very similar. So happy to say 2 years ago that was all formed. There was a governance agreement, and we had our founding partners, and we're joined by Florida Gulf Coast University, which in of itself has done some terrific work on advancing models for climate change. They had received $1 million planning grant from the BP fund. So that's how we got to where we were. And the first thing was, let's find a great person. And we did in Dr. Anna Puszkin-Chevlin, who's with us today.
Well, thank you.
Terrific, Rob. That's a great summary. And Anna, I know that that you, yes, you were hired as regional director. And one of the things that I think people want to hear about is you have an organization that's got climate change, in the name, and that's been something that's been hard to say in Southwest Florida. How important has community engagement been in helping, make progress in the organization?
Well, I think that the community engagement piece has been fundamental, and how you approach that has been fundamental. What we've looked for is a variety of different community players, because as Rob pointed out, we didn't want this to be solely an environmental issue. We wanted to be seen as a community issue. So we reached out to people in different types of partners, people in the healthcare sector, people in the faith sector. We really went deep on getting the business community involved, because that plays well with our local kind of conservative vibe here. So getting business leaders on board was critically important. And as we got a variety of people involved, we were able to diffuse the issue of this being a red issue or a blue issue, and we sort of got to see it as a scientific issue. I think that working with FGCU helped tremendously in that. It opened a lot of doors. Working with FGCU frames this issue directly in science and academia and in education. So it's very neutral politically. And it also opened up a lot of doors because locally there are a lot of supporters of the university. So it was easy to call individuals and companies that either donate to the school, former alumni, or people that even engage in post-education learning. And they come to the university. Saying that we're a university partner was very helpful.
I would say one of the things that turned out to be very important here in the formation is recruiting the right leaders, not just staff leadership, as Anna is, but also Congressman Francis Rooney, our outgoing congressman, is well known on the national stage. One of the few Republicans really willing to move forward with the science of explaining, deep ocean warming, the impacts, the hurricane impacts, the threat to our coasts. He became an early champion of this, and in fact sent out a letter accompanying our request for business leaders to attend and endorsed it. And so just want to give a shout out to Congressman Rooney and his staff for once again leading on this issue, not just in the House and on the national front, but at the regional level too.
Yeah, you just mentioned the two partners who are really important to bringing people together, and that is universities and their research capacity, and then the business community, because people understand cost and the economy and jobs. So absolutely, those are terrific examples of that community engagement. I have two other questions. We're getting questions from our audience as well, and these two seem particularly pertinent. One, not everybody knows what the demographics of Southwest Florida are, and so somebody asked about what about the Latinx community and their engagement. And then the other question, and that one was from Christian from Charlotte, actually, who asked that question. And then we have David from Maryland. who wants to know how do local communities, how do you get them to do some work when they think it might be the state or the federal responsibility to do that? So those two kind of go together, and whoever wants to start.
I'll tee one or two up and really let Anna dig into it. I think we were smart enough to know the Latina community. Latino is hugely growing of influence in Southwest Florida, very important part of the workforce of the community. I think Collier County is 40% Latino and Latina. So one thing was critical was making sure we hired someone who was bilingual and could engage those communities. And in fact, Anna is, and that was actually one of our criteria. We really want to focus on someone who could reach underserved communities and not just think about, this is really not just an issue for the coastal elite to worry about from a real estate loss of value, but this was something where Immokalee, one of the poorest communities in the United States with a lot of migrant workers that live in very poor substandard housing, how are they going to be impacted by this change in weather patterns, for example, indoor mold, air quality issues, asthma, health impacts. And so Anna can talk a little bit more about that outreach, but that was sort of from a requirements that was clear from the get-go. This wasn't just about reaching a few audiences. We really were going to have to work really hard to build trust and have a leader that could engage those communities. And frankly, someone, as Anna has experience working and engaging a wide sector economically and socially and ethnically of different communities. So maybe Anna, you can talk a little bit about the work we're trying to kickstart up in Immokalee, because that's a good example of trying to provide benefit and value.
Yes, certainly. So approaching this from a diversity perspective has been somewhat challenging in that, as Rob pointed out, a lot of the power and wealth lies close to the coast. And the Latino community has been somewhat disengaged with climate issues, particularly in COVID, where a lot of these people have other concerns on top of mind. But what we have done is reached out through other organizations that are deeply entrenched. So in Immokalee, there's a Habitat for Humanity office that provides a lot of social services and has built several communities there. And we have approached them on a concrete kind of project that we can bring to that community. And we hope to tape, because COVID will not allow us to have an in-person meeting, an introduction to the value of trees and shade in a community. We're going to do it in 2 languages. I will do it both in English and Spanish. And we have a facilitator who works in that community in the health perspective that's going to help disseminate that information into that community. We're also on the other thing to understand is that the Latino community is very varied. I don't like to say that it's Latino. There are migrant workers, there are affluent Venezuelan, Cuban business people also. And that's 2 different audiences that have to be addressed differently, different educational caliber, different concerns. So we've been trying to reach out to the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce to engage them. They have been busy with trying to help their businesses survive the COVID period, but I do have some contacts there. And the churches. There are entrees via the Catholic Church diocese that we've been exploring. Haven't made a tremendous number of inroads, but we know that to reach them means not just one approach. It means varied approaches for varied audiences.
Yeah, and I think to answer the second question posed by one of the participants here today, um, in terms of the local cities and how to get them involved, I mean, it's been a real balancing act, I'll be honest. Dr. Mike Savarese at FGCU has been leading the effort to create a Southwest Florida Resiliency Compact, pretty much modeled after the Southeast Compact with some learnings that have been picked up throughout the state. We're certainly over a decade behind in terms of getting organized. The other thing we have challenge with is this area has a terrible history of inability to act as a region. On transportation, education, health, we have a lot of competition. We have a lot of fragmentation, a lot of very different communities, not one big metropolis anchoring the entire region. So we've got some challenges that have meant that just doing anything regionally is already a big lift. However, I do believe that the cities in particular have been compelled by a number of things. Number one, they see the threat quite imminently. Hurricane Irma was a wake-up call, effectively. We did a survey after Hurricane Irma with ecoAmerica, the climate metric survey, and it clearly showed that 76% of people in the area agreed that climate change is real and at least partially caused by human activity, which I don't think before Irma we would have saw that high of acceptance. So, that sort of gave a green light to push forward, and the cities started understanding that they really have to plan for the future for resiliency. And the flooding issues have been they've doubled, I think, in 10 or 12 years, the number of flooding incidences. So, those are the practical on the ground things that constituents call City Hall to complain about. So I think they saw the train coming down the track. And the cities, frankly, have been the first ones to sign on to the effort to create a Southwest Florida Resiliency Compact. And the counties are a little slower moving, but Charlotte County has joined, one of the counties to the north. And we are working on supporting FGCU in getting the big ones, Lee and Collier, on board. And I believe they will come on board. The challenges are coming on board without really asking them to do a lot except to formally sign on. The question of money always becomes a big issue. What are they willing to put into the kitty? I think the approach up to now is mixed in the sense that you have to lower the bar to get everyone just on board. Once they're on board, hopefully they see some value from what we can bring collectively to the region, and then get them to invest beyond just in-kind participatory support. So that's an ongoing challenge. I won't kid anyone. And the state, of course, if the state's going to put money in, they want to know what the local governments are putting in. So we're sort of in the thick of that right now.
Yeah, that's a really good point that that the state governments want to see a match at the local level. They want people to have skin in the game at that level too. And I'm so glad you brought up the Regional Resiliency Compact, because that was one of the questions I was going to ask. But there's also a question from one of our listeners, from Tyler from North Fort Myers, about programs and actions that are in place or that are going to be put in place to create progress at a regional or a state scale. And so to add to that, since you just talked about the compact, how can residents in your area and across Florida help some of these things come together?
I'll start at a high level, then Anna's really got her hand on the detailed strategies. But first of all, hello, Fort Myers. Glad you're here. So the first thing is creating the compact is job one. So I think if you live in Fort Myers, when this is Anna, first of all, sign up for our email distribution. We'll explain how to do that right at the end and send an email link to everyone through the chat function if we can send that out. But number one is the city of Fort Myers, for example, has not yet signed on. We need the city of Fort Myers to sign on. Likewise, Lee County government has not yet signed on. We need Lee County to sign on. So anytime there's a public hearing that the public can show up, we want business leaders and residents and leaders of faith and leaders of health to encourage policymakers to take this step. They need to join. No one city or county can do this on their own. And by the way, it's a competition. There's only going to be so much federal and state resources, and the team that has its act together better and stronger is more likely to succeed in whether it's road elevation dollars or resiliency dollars. So I think encouraging local governments to sign on to the compact is the first most obvious step that's happening right now. That dialogue in the next 3 to 9 months is ongoing, and likely more in the next 3 to 6 months. So that's sort of step one. And then I'll turn it over to Anna for talking about additional local actions and efforts to help the public engage.
Okay, so in terms of the Resiliency Compact, as Rob said, this is something that's in flux right now. We're trying to get the local leaders to cooperate and collaborate. There has been a strong sense in Florida that every city does it on their own. The money comes from the state, but the state doesn't do a lot of implementation. And the public works departments, the parks and recreations departments, they hit it first when the pipe breaks or the roads have to be fixed. And suddenly they're trying to think, well, do I elevate them? Where do I get the money for the extra cost? So cities here have been accustomed to having the city go at it alone. The problem is that that's super inefficient because they all have to contract out to consultants, and then each consultant sort of ratchets up the cost of the analysis. So cooperation is really in their best interest. And that's a fundamental component of the compact, is to get the cities around it. We have to show them that there are cost savings as well as opportunities to leverage state money. So what we need from the public is to make that message really clear. Local officials have shown a reluctance to giving up, home rule, control over their budget, their priorities. We hear that over and over again if you listen to the city council meetings. So the key piece is to have, citizens and stakeholders express support well before that meeting and that vote comes up. And so that's what we've been helping Mike Savarese do, along with other organizations. So a lot of organizations in the environmental space understand this, including Audubon of Florida, Climate Reality folks, and they all want to help. So what we've done is, among ourselves, created a time that we meet every 2 weeks on the phone, figure out which city's coming up next, who knows who in that city. I've prepared an overall informational, pamphlet or one pager. We sent it out to all of our readers, told them to get that out. We have now added additional materials on our website, sample letters that people can use to email their local official. Not just one letter. We wrote, with the help of some volunteers, we wrote one from a tourism perspective, one from an environmental perspective, one from a real estate perspective, so that as our citizens, everybody has their own interest. So they can approach or have a sample letter and bullet points and talking points that are authentically them. And we've put that out on the web. We've put it into our newsletter. Another thing is I do a lot of public speaking, and somehow at the end of every presentation in the take actions, I throw in a slide about the compact. I take 30 seconds to explain it, to tell people what it is, and to tell them to tell everybody about it, and why it's so important, because people can really misunderstand what the compact means. They think people have to put money into this, that we're, giving up control. We need to constantly clarify the message. This is about cooperation, about economic competitiveness, about saving money and getting more resources. And we have to position that message over and over and over again to different audiences.
Absolutely. And Anna, you have a beautiful splash of sunshine. You can tell that it's sunny in Florida today. Those of us who aren't in Florida are jealous. So there you go. I want to follow up on something you talked about, Audubon and some other local groups, because we had somebody, Carol, and she doesn't say what city she's from, but she said that there in other communities, there are lots of groups that are advocating for clean energy. And are there groups that are banding together, like the Conservancy, like Growing Climate Solutions? How are some of those nonprofit community groups working together to help advance solar and to help advance some of those climate solutions? Are there others, other great successes you can talk about?
I can talk a little bit, then let Anna talk more individually, but certainly solar is obviously, we are supposed to be the sunshine state, but we are lagging terribly. And we have had tremendous battles, by the way, with our power companies and power regulators about control of solar. And so that's a whole chapter, a book that needs to be revisited. We successfully defeated an effort funded with over $26 million by the power companies to try and take away control of solar from individual, community Florida co-ops and things like that. So, the people rose up against that effort to control the solar market. So that was a big success. That was 3 years ago. It's called Amendment 1. So there are a lot of on the ground statewide. The League of Women Voters, I know, is one group, for example, that is really working hard to promote co-op solar. And I'll let Anna talk a little bit more, because there are a couple of statewide groups doing terrific work.
So we do have a lot of different organizations. Locally, we have a couple of chapters of Audubon. The state chapter recently set up an office. We have a local Everglades Audubon organization. We have a climate reality group. We have a climate lobby group. We have a new organization called Reset Center. And we all talk to each other, and I'm engaging them as partners of Growing Climate Solutions, but we call them environmental allies. We don't put them strictly in our partnership list, because if our partnership gets too heavily weighted with these kind of groups, it's harder to recruit business and financial interests to engage. So, and of course, we all, birds of a feather, we stick together. So we get on the phone and we, talk, we share information. If they have a meeting, I will post it on my calendar. Likewise, we're organizing some events and they help us get the word out. We share our social media. The people from Climate Reality also became supporters of Growing Climate Solutions. Some of those materials on the compact were developed by one of their volunteers, a retired environmental studies professor, for example. So we're collaborating, but backstage. We don't put that collaboration too out in front because there are politics in that. So we sort of have to manage, and I manage the membership to make us look, squarely in the moderate middle space and maybe even a little toward the right, so that people like banks, insurance companies, real estate companies can feel comfortable. And some of them have beefs with other organizations for some kind of initiative they may have taken 5 years ago. You never know what's behind that. So we do collaborate, but we're each trying to define our space in a certain way.
I
Um,
would say too that one group that's done a really good job at the state level is the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, and Susan Glickman. She's been a longtime leader here. So there has been a lot of controversy around power. Anyone that's heard about the nuclear power plant in in Biscayne Bay that is expanding into an area that will be underwater, according to sea level rise maps in 50 years, is a huge concern to people. So I would say that now that we're the third most populous state in the country, with 1,000 people a day moving to Florida, energy conservation is going to be incredibly important. At the Conservancy, one of the things we try and do is demonstrate, why have those tight energy standards in your building? Why use LED lights? And so we try and walk the walk, and we have an education center here so that we can point out, full throttle sustainability efforts. Like, what does it look like? Where can I get that? And I think part of what Growing Climate Solutions does as an initiative is not try to compete with everyone, as Anna said, but act as a clearinghouse and celebrate each other's success. We co-promote as many other events as our own events, and I think that's a good role for us to play.
One example I'd like to point out is that there are several statewide groups like Resiliency Florida, and a new foundation called the Volo Foundation. And we pick up the phone and they're hosting Climate Week, and we're going to serve as one of their satellite locations and offer an event in their conference, branded by ourselves, but as part of the larger Climate Week effort. We recently reached out to the Environmental Defense Fund folks. They are co-sponsoring a conference in May. So I've been recently invited via them to participate in this conference. I didn't know the original organizer, but they connected me. So we all try to help each other and put together, our specialties and create both a local message and a regional message at the same time.
Yeah, I think that your program is really epitomizing the way that you build community, even in a conservative area. That delicate balancing act of making sure that you're focusing on positive benefits that everyone can agree on, shared values, because climate change shouldn't be a political issue. Unfortunately, it's become that. I wanted to point out, folks who are in the audience can't necessarily see, but in the panelist questions, you guys are getting lots of love from some local groups. I think it was the Southwest Florida Reset Center says, proud to collaborate with growing climate solutions. So you're getting some shout outs. Thank you, Linda. I also wanted to delve a little bit more into some of the other successes. I know that there have been some opinion pieces that your climate ambassadors have published, and there's been some, engagement, outreach, and education there. So I don't know, Anna, if you want to talk a little bit more about some of the recent successes that Growing Climate Solutions could point to that's going to inspire people in other parts of the state and the country.
Well, I think one of the successes was initiative was sort of formally launched March 10th, a week before COVID shut everything down. So we have been able to engage 32 partners over this year, and a couple more add on every week or so. Through the partners, we've tried to do some real concrete work when we haven't been able to meet in person. So I'm still fostering a really solid relationship with the Girl Scouts of Southwest Florida. It's called the chapter is the Gulf Stream Southwest Florida Girl Scouts or something. And they were looking to do a climate badge or a climate patch for their girls and didn't have a curriculum for it. So in sort of June, July, and August, we forged a first climate patch for them. They have been getting it approved through their marketing department, but we hope to launch that soon. Another, I think, solid relationship that we've built is with some of our ambassadors. So it's amazing how people find you. A climate negator was published in a local newspaper, and out of nowhere, somebody who had not been part of our network found us online and said, I think you should be aware of this. And we read the piece, I shared it with Jennifer, and it was like, oh no, not again, right? And we thought about how to position a reply to that. We can't let those things stand, especially when they come from people that have some standing in that community. This was a commissioner on a zoning and planning board. Ouch, right? A planning and zoning person who's a climate denier. How are we going to do those land use things, you know? So we engaged one of our ambassadors who had a PhD in rhetoric, which was very convenient. And we crafted a nice letter, the three of us back and forth, and he sent it and it was published as a rebuttal. And that was fantastic. And now each of us, we're sort of promoting that kind of engagement. Another form of engagement, which we have found helpful, is in May, as COVID didn't allow us to do these climate ambassador trainings in person, we tweaked the curriculum a little and had our climate ambassadors learn how to use social media. And FGCU that's our local university, has a service learning requirement for all of their students. And many of the students looking for service hours joined our climate ambassador program. And suddenly we had all these 20 and 30 somethings tweeting on social media, all kinds of climate information and getting retweeted and retweeted. Some of them are still engaged with our climate ambassador program, but it allowed us to reach a different demographic than the one we typically engage with. And it was exciting. Some of the feedback, Jennifer, I think you would agree, was this is one of the most fun and interesting community service projects I've done. I still have two of them tweeting away, and they used other platforms like Instagram that I wouldn't typically use. So we do the Facebook, those young ones do the Instagram. And I think that was enormously successful in getting our message out to young people.
Mhm.
Absolutely, the youth have led the way for us oldsters in a lot of areas, and certainly social media and anything to do with technology is one of those areas. We've seen tremendously creative videos put together in support, and terrific pictures of climate solutions and ways that people can be engaged. And so that was a great training, and we look forward to many more of those and to continuing to activate the population there. We have another question from Ken in Naples that is a little more specific about reducing emissions in the built environment. And so he's interested to hear some of the things going on in Southwest Florida that people should be aware of, or how can people and organizations reduce their emissions in the built environment. So,
Well, I'll tee it up a little bit, and Ken, thanks for your question. And Anna can dive in a little more specifically. But one of the things that we're trying to get off the ground is every major employer across the country is trying to deal with remote work policies. Well, one of the great things about remote work is people are not driving cars on the road at the pace and level and intensity they were before. That's great for quality of life. It's great for accidents, reducing accidents, wildlife being injured on the roads. But it also reduces emissions, and we know that transportation sector is a major source of emissions in Southwest Florida. Unlike perhaps some other parts of the country that have larger industrial bases, this is really not an industrial area. This area is primarily tourism, second home real estate, fishing, tourism, et cetera, is the driver. And ag, of course, is significant, particularly in the inland counties here. Large cattle and of course, tomato and other types of farming were the breadbasket in the winter for the United States, effectively. So there are problems there, of course, that can be mitigated. But I would say that transportation and how can we assist companies in creating better permanent policies that allow for that, what everyone wants in the future, we believe, talking to the people like some of the leading think tanks regarding the future of work. We know that younger workers are looking for more flexibility. The melding of work and personal life is more integrated. Therefore, there's an opportunity there to reduce those transportation sector emissions just by putting good work policies in. And could we be helpful to our partners in creating model policies so that companies could adapt them to their own companies. So that's just one example of what one sector of one thing that can be done at a small company individually or larger. I'll let Anna talk about some of the other efforts to reduce emissions, but that's one for sure.
Well, I think another, certainly transportation is about 45% of the greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Florida. And another 42% is electrical consumption, which encompasses everything from keeping our webinars on and the lights on. But in Florida, we also air condition a lot. So looking at the future of the built environment is in terms of housing and construction, there are certain trends we really have to look at. First, what are we going to do with future development, right? Um, there is a lot of pressure to keep expanding in a sprawl pattern. We have to look carefully at how those land use regulations are being written and modified and really encourage infill development for us, west toward the Gulf and infill of existing urban areas that right now have an abundance of parking lots, a lot of older buildings that could be rebuilt or remodeled instead of allowing that pressure to go ever eastward. But somebody has to keep their eye on how development trends are going, and we have to look at higher density and more walkability. So when we look at transportation, we have to look at the building of complete streets. If we want people to walk, if we want people to bike safely, they can't do it in the current infrastructure. The bike lanes are just too narrow. There are no buffers. So over time, that infrastructure will get rebuilt, and we have to make sure as citizens that our planning departments and our community development departments both incentivize infill development, look at our road systems for complete streets, wider sidewalks, safer bike lanes, multimodal transportation and connectivity, multimodal access in terms of ride share for what they call the last mile. Once you've gotten off the bus, how do you get to your destination?
Mhm.
Another piece of this, which is really important, is retrofitting the existing environment. We have a ton of building already, and it's all, much of it is aging, much of it is energy inefficient, whether that's, telling people to change those LED light bulbs or make sure they use a ceiling fan. For me, one of my peeves, shade. It's going to get hot here. And shade is an afterthought, but the more we start thinking about shading our windows, planting more trees around our buildings, creating more shade on our sidewalks, these are all things that are going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It's easier to cool a building if there's shade on it. It's easier to cool a building when you put proper blinds, when you use e-glass. So it's two parts. How should the new construction look, and how do we retrofit the existing infrastructure and the existing building stock?
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And just to talk about, someone had posed a question about growth and development, the scale and level of growth. No one knew 10 months ago, before COVID hit, that we'd be in a super overheated real estate economy. In fact, all signs were indicating that we're moving the opposite direction. But half of Chicago, New Jersey has moved to Naples, I think, or they're on their way. So one of the big things happening right now in Collier County and in Lee County is, we're supposed to be building these smart communities of the future, these intense, higher density nodes, so that we just don't have the traditional sprawling mega developments. And that's something that the Conservancy of Southwest Florida has been a huge advocate for smart growth. And as Anna said, it's absolutely essential that we get growth right. We know we're going to grow. How do we grow? And can we do it in a way that doesn't destroy primary panther habitat, can be done more sustainably, can help reduce emissions, and also can help not impact water flow? And one of the big initiatives happening right now at the state level, when you think more broadly about sustainability, is it's statewide stormwater standards. It may not directly be impacted to climate change, but it has to do with sustainability. And the answer is this: when Hurricane Andrew came through the state of Florida, what did Florida do? It increased its building standards. Now, the builders all complained. They said, oh, it's going to put us out of business. It's put no one out of business, right? And you saw it when Hurricane Michael hit the Panhandle. You saw the buildings that resisted that storm and those that succumbed to it. And so I would make the same case today that we need to build sustainably. We need to look at higher density, less sprawl, and we need to look at those fully multimodal types of transportation, as Anna said. So we have an opportunity, but it's really going to take a lot of public engagement at the county level. And right now, we're not winning the hearts and minds yet of the decision makers, and we need to stay at it.
Well, you all are truly experts in what's going on in Florida and what's going on with sustainability and greenhouse gases. I was just thinking about some of the terms that we've used today: smart growth, complete streets, climate justice, environmental justice. We find that people still need to learn what these are and to understand them. And so, your engagement and the education that you're doing, whether it's Girl Scouts or adults, Rotary clubs, it's just incredibly important. And I know that you also have a program coming up for the spring. I want to give you a chance to talk about that speaker series. I also want to mention that someone in the chat has another idea for a program for you. Andrew said, you all should give an award program for people who are doing a great job on, on climate solutions. So you can add that to your list of things that you might do. But tell us a little more about what's going on this spring.
I'll let Anna go ahead and tee up our new speaker series, which is very exciting.
Yes, we're really excited about it. So while I do a lot of outreach to different groups, I think that sometimes people want to hear from somebody other than me. And it's absolutely important that we bring in diverse perspectives. And what we have decided to do for February, March, and April is put together a three-part speaker series bringing national experts to Southwest Florida. And starting on February 24th, we're launching the Southwest Florida Climate Compass series. And our first speaker is going to be Bob Ingalls. He's a former South Carolina congressman and the founder of a group called Republicans. It's Republicans for the Environment. He will be talking about bipartisan support for climate solutions. So his title is like what conservatives can do on climate. Next, for March, we've teed up a Rear Admiral from the Navy, Jonathan White, who will be speaking on oceans and security. So we wanted to bring a national and international perspective to this. And the April speaker is Professor Benjamin Keyes, and he is a professor of real estate at the Wharton School of Business at University of Pennsylvania. And his very cutting edge research has been looking at property values in coastal zip codes all around the state of Florida. His work was recently highlighted in the New York Times, where they're finding that, lo and behold, after 2018, people have started to realize the danger and future threats to real estate investment in coastal areas. And we're beginning to see a market adjustment to that risk in values, both in transaction volume and in values. So in positioning this three-part series, we really looked for people who are super experts in their field, can bring a different national voice to our discussion, but really hone in on topics that are relevant to our demographics. A conservative political approach, security, national security, international security, and real estate.
It sounds like a terrific spring program, and I hope that folks listening will go to the website and sign up for some of those and continue to learn more about what's going on. We have one last question, and then we're going to have to wrap it up. Unfortunately, we're getting close to the end. I know, time just flies. But this one is from Bob, and he wants to know how do we get systemic solutions for things like transportation resiliency when you're working in all these diverse communities in a 5-county region. Some are coastal counties, some aren't. You've got the different demographics, you've got lower and higher income areas. What are some of the learnings from trying to pull this kind of group together?
We talk to people smarter than us. This is the first thing we do, people like Bob, and we figure out other communities that have done it and what can we learn from them. I'm a huge believer in being a smart follower, right? And none of us hold all the keys here to the solutions. However, I will say for growing climate solutions that we have strategically said we're going to put a huge amount of initiative into helping this compact get on its feet. We believe without government action, it's almost going to be impossible. I mean, we can have as much community engagement and action as possible. Without governmental, systemic governmental policy in terms of integrating resiliency planning into building codes and zoning decisions, it's not something that parks off to the right. It has to be integrated across everything in order to be successful. That takes governments to really buy into this. The second thing that we believe is systemic is providing training opportunities so that every single city and county in Southwest Florida will have a designated and well-trained and certified resilience officer. We don't have any resiliency officers in the entire region. That's highly unusual for a coastal region to not have one person who's part of the city or the county that really is trained in resiliency planning. So I think those are two things we can do. And the third thing we're doing is making sure that we're motivating, inspiring, and encouraging communities of faith, of residential people, business people, health people, to all lend their voice so that a meaningful compact that has a sense of ambition and urgency behind it can take flight, can actually take off. In the meantime, we just have to keep recruiting a diverse set of participants to reflect the diversity of our region so that their voices are not lost. One of the things that Sarah, who is the executive director of the South Florida Community Foundation, said very early on to us, she has a lot of experience working in Fort Myers and Lee County. She said, don't leave the communities of color off. You have to get these people involved now. Don't have your first meeting and then try to bring in communities that typically are not engaged on the front end of these issues. So Anna has worked very, very hard. We still have more work to do ahead of us, but we can use the help of everyone here to find those centers of passion and people who are concerned about their communities, whether it's toxic waste or whether it's flooding issues. A lot of these are connected to the changes in our climate. And of course, the heat index issues are becoming a bigger issue for construction industry down here. So we have to get that perspective as part of our chorus and all sing from a similar song sheet to create a wonderful, hopefully future vision for what this area, how can we withstand what is already coming, and then what can we do to mitigate, and how can we reduce some of our contributions towards climate. So 20,000 level perspective.
Oh, that's a great answer to a complex question. And you were doing just tremendous work. Anna, did you have anything to add to that? Because
I'm sure Anna does. She's smarter than I am on all this stuff.
No, I would only add that building a diverse coalition is challenging, and different communities have different receptivity to this issue. So what it really is a web. You get a couple of people that are very enthusiastic, have the time and commitment, and they know people, and then you bring those people in, and then those people know different types of people, and you always make it a point to ask, who else can you introduce me to? Who else can you know in your next conversation with them, tell them about us and have them reach out to me? So I'm constantly networking, and pushing the envelope to meet more and diverse sectors of our organization. And it is difficult, but we need to, everybody holds everybody else's hand. We need to keep the whole web engaged. So I sort of set up a hierarchy. I know that, certain people will reach out and get that word message out, and we build it through personal relationships and constantly celebrating those relationships, reminding people that, it's like a tier system. Hey, if I talk to you, will you talk to these others? Because you can't do it all by yourself. So holding the group together is reaching out to, climate lobby, who knows the Hispanic chamber, who knows the head of the church and the pastor, and exploring, all the chains in that relationship so that you can get deeper and deeper into communities that are typically underrepresented. And that's challenging, but we're working really hard. We're very committed to that.
this is great to hear, and you're really inspiring a lot of people around the country in our network. And so I appreciate that so much. And remind me, Anna, one of my goals this year is to have one of these Let's Talk episodes in Spanish. So we're going to have to get you
Okay.
on that one. Claro que sí.
Por supuesto.
So we will do that. Actually, ecoAmerica, we have just come out with our JEDI principles: justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. You can see that on our website. It is going to be a theme for the year, and it's incredibly important. Communities that have been left out absolutely need to be at the table and included, because they have great solutions, and that engagement you talk about. You also, that engagement is so important. And Rob, you gave people something great they can advocate for, and that is that regional resiliency officer. That somebody needs to figure out a way to make that happen, so that the Southwest Florida region has that point of contact, from the government perspective of coordinating some of that complex response. So another
Absolutely.
great thing. that folks who are listening or in the region can be talking to their elected officials about. So we have time for a quick lightning round of one thing that gives you hope as we go into 2021. You've given us a lot of different things that are going on and some great examples of progress. But what is one thing you want to leave with our listeners that gives you hope for the year ahead?
Well, for me, I would say what gives me a lot of hope is that we had a huge water crisis here in Florida that pummeled communities, created health impacts, and forever changed the political landscape of the state. I don't think we're going back. It was a breakthrough moment. And I think if we can leverage climate to the water quality issues, they're hugely connected. The warmer the Gulf of Mexico, the friendlier it is to algae blooms. The more algae blooms, the more the core businesses and community and quality of life, or the reason why people are here, will be challenged. And so that's an opportunity to mobilize around those issues. So it's happened once. And if we can build off of that with everything else that we described today, I'm quite hopeful that we can avoid getting divided on this and stay united and focused on community.
And Anna, how about you?
As obscure as this may sound, I think the lessons that we've learned from COVID are hugely inspirational. Um, we What COVID showed us is that one, emergencies can emerge when we least expect them. There's the black swan there, and climate shouldn't be one of them. And what we saw, the kind of response that we saw to COVID, and the lack of response, taught us a lot. It showed us that we can no longer be complacent, that we must prepare for every eventuality. I think that COVID will inspire people not to let climate become the same kind of issue. It also really tested our ability to adapt and be flexible. Within 10 months, we're all meeting in Zoom. People are traveling less because of that. People are working from home, finding a new work balance. When you're home, you start a garden. You start composting. You realize that there's a lot of not a lot of ancillary consumption that you don't need to do. And while some people may label that an economic recession, and of course there is, and there's a lot of pain in that, and we don't want to see that. In some ways, the amount of greenhouse gases saved this 1 year has been like 30%. A New York Times article just came out. If we can regrow our economy without restarting that engine, the projection is that we could meet the goals of the Paris Climate Accord. So hopefully COVID will show us that while we climb out of a recessionary period, we don't have to do it the same way. We can do it smarter, we can do it more ecologically balanced, and we can still have a vibrant economy without the same kind of impact on our environment. So I think that is a lesson to be learned. One, prepare and be prepared for the future. And two, be flexible, because the future can be different than what we anticipate and still be glorious.
Terrific. Rob, you unmuted. Did you want to say something else?
I just wanted to acknowledge and thank ecoAmerica, Bob Perkowitz, Jennifer, and Megan, and the whole team. Our ability to get off the ground and do what we've done would not have been possible at the speed had it not been without the support of ecoAmerica. So they just deserve a huge kudo from us to you directly and to everyone else listening. I know you're all believers in what they are doing in terms of creating a models to engage, different communities and how to do it, and so that we can be smart followers and not have to figure it out every time on our own. And with an incoming new administration, having those Washington connections will be very important to smaller groups like ours, so that we can work together to advance good climate policy. So just thanks for what you do. We appreciate it.
Thank you. And I want to thank you, Rob and Anna, for your time today, for your commitment to a brighter future for Southwest Florida and for our country and our globe. And it's been a pleasure talking with you. There have been so many great ideas. I want to thank the audience. The chat has been on fire. And so if you all have not been able to read it, when we record it and save it, the chat is saved as well. So there are lots of great people are giving you guys suggestions of people to talk to. It's wonderful. So thank you to the audience. On behalf of ecoAmerica, we give you a big applause, our audience and our our expert speakers and panelists today. We look forward to working with you in the year to come.
Thanks, everybody, and thanks for everyone taking the time to participate. We appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone. And I hope that you'll reach out to me on the web, sign up, get our newsletter, and get engaged with us.
Yeah, growingclimatesolutions.org for the local.
There you go. And we've got things coming up here with ecoAmerica. We have Let's Talk Climate again next week. Next week, it's going to be our health sector. And so it's hindsight is 2020, our climate and health goals for 2021. You can keep looking and engaging on Let's Talk Climate. Follow us for the latest on leadership and resources, our episodes on climate action. I think this episode is going to get a lot of views because you guys were fantastic today. So from all of us at ecoAmerica, thank you so much. Stay well, stay healthy, and we'll see you soon. Take care.